Having a dinner party and need a great new recipe? I'm not your girl. I hate to cook. But if you're giving a presentation or a speech at your dinner party and you need a recipe for that, I'm your girl. So let's get cooking. Every amazing recipe starts with three things: ingredients, preparation and seasoning, and presentation. If you have ever watched one of those cooking shows on HGTV or wherever, then you know those are the three things that the judges look at when they're trying to determine a winner. It's not any different with a speech. Those three things are super important to a recipe for a great speech. Let's talk about the ingredients needed when you're doing your speech. The first thing is, what is your point? Is your point that you're trying to teach the audience how to do their own taxes? Or perhaps you want to inspire them to lead a healthier lifestyle? Whatever your point is, you have to focus on that and use that to begin developing your speech. Then when you start writing, it's important to be organized. Organization is key to a great speech. When we were in grade school, we learned how to write, and we learned how to write these compositions that consisted of an opening, a body, and a closing. And you may have even heard, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. You can do that without being so direct about it. So try not to focus too much on that because it takes away from the engagement of your speech. If you start out by saying, today I'm going to tell you this, then tell them, okay, this is what I just told you. You can be more subtle about it. I like to start with the body of my speech and then come up with a creative way to open and close it. So let's talk about the body a little bit. When you're doing the body of your speech, if you can come up with three main points and build an outline around that, it works really well. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. If you have a speech that calls for 4 points, then that's okay too. But if you are starting from scratch and have an open idea that you can build upon, 3 is always a great number. 3 works well in a lot of situations. So you come up with these points. For each point you come up with, you can elaborate and create bullet points under that, and then eventually get to the point that you're writing out. I always write my speeches completely out, and I'll explain why in just a little bit, but I write them completely out. And when I do, it allows me to see, am I giving equal time to each of the 3 points? If I talk about 3 things, but I only spend 1 minute on the first thing and 2 minutes on the second thing, but then I spend like 8 minutes on the third thing, then I know I have an issue and I need to build on one or the other or cut down on one or the other. So it gives you an idea of one of the reasons that I write it completely out. Another reason is because I look for specific wording and things like that. Once I get to the body built up, then I look at how can I open and close in a way that will engage my audience. The whole point of the opening is to immediately draw the audience in and get them to look at you and listen to you. So you want to be creative. Then the closing, with that, you'll want to make sure that you leave the audience satisfied. You let them know that your speech is over. There's nothing worse than ending in an abrupt way and the audience is saying, wait, is she finished or is she still talking? You have to let your audience know you're done talking in a way that you're wrapping it up and you're not just saying, okay, I'm finished or thank you. Then you also want to make sure that you come full circle. I like to think of the opening and closing as 2 ends of a rope or a ribbon that tie together nicely in a bow around your body. So for example, if you start out a speech with a quote, you might want to end with that same quote or a similar quote that reflects on the original quote. Perhaps you want to start your speech with a story and then end with a different story. or start a story and then hold the ending or the conclusion of the story till the end. I'll give you an example of that. One time I gave a speech at a graduation to a group of medical students about how a nurse in a hospital had changed my son's life over the course of 9 months while he was staying there. The way I opened the speech was to talk about my son's accident he had been in and how this nurse was the one who met us at the door to the burn center where he was at the time. And then I talked about that nurse and the qualities she had as part of the body of my speech. And I gave some examples of things she had done that made her a great nurse. At the end of my speech, I closed by going back and saying, that nurse changed our journey. She met us at the door when we came in, and she met us in the lobby as we were leaving when my son left the hospital 9 months later. I also shared an update on my son so that people would know he was doing well and that he wasn't still struggling. And that gave them some comfort to know that his hospital stay had ended well. So you want to wrap things up nicely in a nice little package and make sure your audience feels good about what you've just told them. One of the things you need to remember too with the closing is that you want to make the audience, you don't want to leave anything out so that they walk away feeling confused or wanting more. It's always nice for them to want to hear you speak again, but you don't want to make it to the point that they felt like you left something out. Another thing that you need to look at is the words. It's another reason that I said that I write my speech completely out. Oftentimes, we tend to use the same words over and over again. We use adjectives that are the same when we're describing things. So, for example, I love adjectives that begin with vowel sounds, and all of my speaking buddies tease me about this. I like to say words like awesome, incredible, exciting, adventurous. They all start with vowels, A-E-I-O-U. So I challenge myself when I've written a speech to go back through and look for those adjectives and change them to ones that begin with a consonant so that I'm varying it up a little bit. Also, you don't want to repeat the same words you've used in sentences that are right next to each other. So if you say client in one sentence, in the very next sentence, you use the word client again, read it out loud and see how it sounds. And if it needs to be changed, change it to customer in the second sentence. You want to vary those words up so that it doesn't sound like you're repeating over and over again the same words or phrases. However, keep in mind that there are some cases where you might like to repeat something for emphasis. When you do that, do it at least 3 times. That shows that you didn't accidentally do it. You did it on purpose. So, for example, if I was answering a question about my favorite TV show and I said, I like The Office because yada, yada, yada. My next sentence might be, I like The Office because, and then finally, I like The Office because. I repeated it for emphasis, not accidentally. So by saying it 3 times, it lets the audience know I'm doing this on purpose because I want to make a point and not an accident. Watch those words. Finally, the outcome is super important. And a lot of times when we're speaking, we think the outcome is that we want the audience to love us. But the truth is, the true outcome should be that you want the audience to love themselves. I heard someone say one time, the sign of a great speech is that the audience walks away feeling better about themselves, not the speaker. And so it's true. You want to make the audience feel like they've gotten something out of it. They are inspired, they are motivated, and they feel better about themselves. Let's talk about preparation and seasoning in your speech recipe. Vocal variety is really important. Vocal variety is how you change your voice when you're delivering your message. So you might talk faster or slower, or you might talk louder or softer, or you may even go so far as to change your voice and do an accent. Dialogue is always great in speeches, especially if you're telling a story. So if I'm telling the story of my son's hospital stay and I'm telling the audience what the nurse said to me that made me feel so much better, I may actually use dialogue and speak as myself, then speak as the nurse, then speak as myself, then speak as the nurse. When you're doing that, you might want to change your voice so that the nurse sounds a little different than you, and it's clear to the audience who is speaking without you saying, and then the nurse said, and then I said. You can leave all that out if you change the voice up a little bit, and it makes it more interesting and engaging. They can picture the conversation a little bit better. But vocal variety is important for a lot of reasons. If I'm telling you a story and I'm really excited because my son got out the hospital and he's doing great, then I want to show that in my voice. But if I'm telling you about the accident that happened that put him in the hospital, I may tend to speak a little differently, a little more somber and not as excited because it was not a happy time. The end, where he got out of the hospital, that's where the joy was. And that's where my vocal variety completely changed. And I left the audience with that up feeling because that's how I ended the speech. Now let's talk about facial expressions. Same deal. Facial expressions should match whatever you're talking about. If you smile throughout your speech, which is what I've been accused of doing, when you're talking about something sad and you still got a smile on your face, it misleads the audience. It confuses them. So if I'm talking about that somber time when my son was in an accident and in the hospital, I'm going to change the way my face looks. I'm going to change my facial expressions. I'm not going to smile through the whole thing. I'm going to let you know that was not a good time for me. It was not a happy time. And so that is your way of conveying that emotion. Besides your voice, it's also in your facial expressions. When you think about it in life, when real life situations are happening, your face changes and your voice changes. And you know what else changes? Your body language. Your body language is different when you're excited than it is when you are sad. So if I was telling you about something sad, I may lean in a little bit and talk about it like just between us. Let me tell you what a horrible time that was. I may lean back. It's harder on Zoom, but you can still have great body language even when you're on Zoom. I tend to use my hands a lot. I hope I'm demonstrating that well today for you. Make sure you use your hands with purpose, though, and they're not flying all around willy-nilly. But you can do a lot, even on camera. You can lean to one side. You're talking about how you almost fell off your high heels or how you almost fell out of the boat. I had a really fun speech that I did one time about how I fell into the lake, and I had some great body language with that, talking about how my husband pulled me out of the water. And I gave him a hard time in the speech, which was well deserved. But the body language I was able to use was really a lot of fun. And you can enjoy giving your speeches by incorporating vocal variety, facial expressions, and body language. Visual aids are great, but if you're going to use visual aids, make sure they are important to your speech. If they're not needed, don't use them. Visual aids tend to detract from what you're talking about. I'm using this PowerPoint today just to help you visualize what I'm saying. But if you'll notice, each slide is very simple, a few words just to help you keep track, maybe take notes. But I'm not cluttered the screen with paragraphs of writing. That's the worst thing you can do. And the themes that come with PowerPoint aren't the greatest. So I would stay away from that and instead use the design feature in PowerPoint. Now, I did this presentation or a similar one a few weeks ago, and one of the girls in the audience emailed me afterward, and she said, "Tina, I loved your presentation. I got to tell you, though, if I had only been there for that one tip you gave, it would have been worth the whole 30 minutes. And the tip she was talking about was the design feature in Microsoft PowerPoint. If you use PowerPoint, there is a feature that you can click on the ribbon. That's the design feature. and it gives you design ideas. So you basically take a blank slide, you paste your text onto it, and it should be text that you created in text boxes within PowerPoint, not pictures. Then you add a picture or two, and then you tell PowerPoint to give you some design options. And it gives you the greatest ones. This is how I created this presentation. I used the design feature in Microsoft PowerPoint. Awesome. I have improved my slides so much. They were never this good. And so I encourage you to check that out. And if you need some more specific instructions with it, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to share it with you. It's one of my favorite things. It's a little secret I use. Rehearsal. Rehearsal is critical. Can you imagine a singer or a performer of any kind getting on stage without rehearsing? Rehearsing is critical. You know, the most important thing that rehearsal does for us, though, is it stops us from being nervous. It may not eliminate all the nervousness, but I'm telling you, it is essential to taking away a lot of the nervous anxiety that goes along with speaking in public. Practice, practice, practice. And when I say rehearsal, I mean legit put a lot of time into your rehearsal. I start out after I've completely written a speech and checked it for timing. I read it back one time for timing and then I adjust it as needed. So if I'm supposed to speak 5 to 7 minutes, I shoot for 6. That way I know I can add something when I'm actually presenting it, or maybe leave something out and it won't make me go under time. So make sure that you are well rehearsed. Once you have that timing and you know your speech is finalized, read that baby 10 times, exactly as written. Try to read it at the pace that you would normally read it at or speak it at. If you're required to speak without notes, then what you're going to want to do is go from your written out speech back to your outline. Try working with your outline or note cards, presenting it that way. And then eventually, when you're comfortable enough, you can move on to the speech with no notes. Is it a lot of work? Yes, it's a lot of work. Will it make you a better presenter? Absolutely, no doubt about it. If you're going to give a speech, it's best to practice, practice, practice. Get all that rehearsal in. You know, those folks on the cooking shows, they don't just go on there having cooked nothing. They are prepared. They have rehearsed. They may not have known what recipe they were going to get on the show, but they have already practiced cooking a lot of different things. The presentation. Now, even in cooking, we like to give a nice presentation. Look at that beautiful dish on the screen. You always want to look good in the end and come off as professional, but engaging. One of the ways you can do that is to listen ahead. If there are other speakers who speak before you, make sure you listen to what they're sharing, because you might be able to reflect back on something they've said or incorporate that into your own speech. It does a few things. It makes them feel good, makes them realize you were listening. It also makes your audience know that, hey, she doesn't think she's so much better than them that she didn't have to listen to them. And it helps people connect the dots. Oh, she said that, and now she's reflecting and confirming it. So I need to try that. Then allow for applause. When you're first on the stage, a lot of times the person will introduce you, that's hosting, and then there will be a rousing round of applause. Don't start speaking until that applause stops. Same for laughter. If people are laughing at your speech, then you need to allow them to laugh before you move on with your next point. Sometimes it might make you go a little over time, but if you plan ahead for that, you can make sure you stick with the time. Sometimes you may not realize that you're going to be as funny as you thought you were, and it turns out a little differently. So just try to prepare for that. Don't forget to pause before speaking. This is also good to help you with your noise, with your nerves. When you're introduced and you come out on the stage, you wait for that applause. When the applause stops, pause, take a deep breath, and then begin speaking. You'd be shocked at how much this relaxes you and settles your nerves. It's amazing. stick to the plan. This is really important because a lot of times we get nervous and we get off track and then we start going on a tangent and it's hard to get back. Even if you have to have a copy of your notes nearby, if you start to get off track, say to the audience, I'm getting off track. Let me get back to the plan. And then glance at your notes and move on. You don't want to get so off base that you don't meet the point of your speech. Remember, that point is super important. So you want to stick to the plan. And then last but not least, relax and enjoy it. Speaking is fun. I enjoy it. So I hope that you can too. I hope that you will be able to enjoy what you're saying. But if you're not prepared with all of these other things, the preparation and the right ingredients and the seasoning and the presentation of it all, you won't get to enjoy it the way you should. So be sure to follow this recipe for a great speech, and I'm sure you'll be very successful in the end. The great Julia Childs said, you don't have to cook fancy or complicated masterpieces, just good food from fresh ingredients. Friends, I want you to create a great message with fresh material. That is the ultimate recipe for a great speech.